Okay, so I think we'll get started now, if that works for everyone who's attending. So first of all, thank you very much for being here today. So good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Zoe Knight. I'm a risk advisor with International Location Safety. So thank you for being here. We will be recording this session and there will be an opportunity to ask questions as well via the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom bar. We will be managing that on our end as well. I hope you can all hear and see me well. If you cannot, please feel free to put a message into the chat and hopefully we can help you in sorting that out. Okay, so before we get into the topic for today's webinar discussion, just an introduction on the webinar series for those of you joining for the first time. So this is the third in a three-part series looking at travel risk management. It's done through a partnership between International Location Safety, so ILS, and RiskPal. So ILS, we are a specialist risk advisory, training and travel risk management organisation. And RiskPal provides a digital risk assessment platform intended both to boost duty of care and compliance as well. We've recently announced this partnership, which combines ILS's travel risk advisory support services and RiskPal's digital risk assessment platform. Now, as I mentioned, this is the third of three-part series, webinar series. You can actually find the other two webinars on YouTube, and those have been shared on the LinkedIn platform as well. So the very first one looked at how to be a successful travel risk manager in 2025, and the second looked at profile resilience and response in travel risk management. Okay, and the reason we're hosting the series of webinars is really to support the higher education university clients that we work with. We know that in that sector there is a lot of travel, often to a variety of different locations, both lower risk and on the higher risk end, and we know that it can be quite a difficult process for universities to manage sometimes, just given the volume of documents, the volume of requests, and just how the sector of risk management is evolving. So by bringing together ILS and RiskPal, we are looking to, with this partnership, really offer a comprehensive and budget-friendly approach to travel risk management. So if you have any questions about ILS or RiskPal, you are very welcome to reach out to us. There is an email at the bottom here of the slide that you will be able to use to contact ILS, and also RiskPal will be able to share those details as well. So before we get started, I would just like to hand over to my colleagues that are on the webinar series with me today. Just give them opportunity to introduce themselves. Perhaps we can go in order of pictures on the screen. So Colin, if I could hand over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Zoe. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name's Colin Dale. I'm the Director of Global Sales for Vismo, based in the UK. Vismo is a global tracking, mass communications and incident management platform, and currently used by 300 organisations with around about 500,000 individuals using our services.
Fantastic, thank you. And on to you, Jessie.
Hi, I guess I want to say good morning, but I realize that a bunch of folks on this call are probably calling in from across the pond, but I'm based in New York. My name is Jessie, and I'm the VP of Social Good and Nonprofit Partnerships at Dataminer. And Dataminer is a real-time event detection platform. We are at our heart an AI company, and we use our AI as a sense-making machine, essentially to identify when meaningful events are unfolding around the world and to provide real-time updates on that. So our primary use cases are for security teams, whether they be at universities, humanitarian organizations, or corporations that are trying to protect their staff and researchers around the world.
Fantastic, thank you, Jessie. And last but not least, Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Bacon. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at RiskPal. And as Zoe introduced, we are a digital risk assessment platform, essentially aimed at improving workflow for any risk assessment requirements. We set up RiskPal during COVID, which was a fun launch. Primarily specializing in media and working with a number of international media organizations. And in the last 2 years, as we've got to work more with the higher education sector, have really developed our offering for universities, both in the UK and internationally, recognizing that there is a big issue around risk assessment and how that is managed, the practicalities of it with such large numbers of travelers. Thanks, Zoe.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now, for the sake of ensuring that you can all see our faces and not just stare at pictures of us, I'm now going to disable the presentation in the background, but I'll bring it back up at the end in case anyone wants to find the emails that they need to contact. Okay. Fantastic. So let's get into it. I guess the first thing that we want to discuss here are how do digital tech and tools fit into an effective security management system for an academic institution? And perhaps you can speak to a little bit about how your tools might be used to supplement some of these existing processes and procedures.
Great, I'm happy to start on that one. So I think, frankly, you can't have an effective travel policy without any utilization of technology, given that from whether it's from booking with your travel management company to tracking through services like Colin and Vismos and response and the multitude of intelligence feeds that you get, there has to be some element of technology that kind of assists in your travel risk management program. And if you're looking at the standard around the ISO 31030, which I know a lot of academic institutions is I really feel it would be very difficult to achieve that in isolation from any element of technology. But it's not the be all and end all, and that's not to override the human in the process, which I think is something we're going to talk about as well today. So I think, yeah, that's it really. I mean, I think the other thing I'd note is being aware of your tech stack and what technology you use is also really, really important. Sometimes we work with institutions that don't know actually that they have access to a series of tools, perhaps through their insurance provider, for example. So actually having that mapped and integrated as part of your travel policy and processes is really important. So I think that sort of mapping process is a key part of any travel risk management program.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom. I think I was just sort of reminiscing on when I was at university and I did an exchange program, for example, and it was very much there's reliance on a single individual within an office and someone I'd never actually met face to face. And I was really relying on them to really keep an eye out for me, make sure they knew where I was at all times, to update me on any significant developments that were happening around the world. But I can imagine that's obviously very difficult for sometimes a single person to do within a university staff team, sometimes maybe 2 or 3, but it's a lot to do. It'd be interesting to hear perhaps some of the others. How do you feel that this sort of fits into this tech and these digital tools are fitting into building this capacity, for example, amongst universities?
Jesse, do you want to go or do you want me to have a go at this?
You can have a go first. Go ahead.
All right, okay. It's a really interesting question. What I can say, and I know our marketing managers on this call, and I looked at some stats earlier on, and higher education for us is the highest number of hits on our website by over 50% more than any other industry sector, but it's probably the lowest number of deployments that we have. And to Zoe's point earlier, we've had a number of case studies where students have been traveling out on research programs to pretty far-flung places. One in particular was Tanzania, going out to one of the volcanoes out in Tanzania and meeting people she'd never met before to be part of the team that supported her. And for her, there was nothing in place. A lone female traveller trying to find her way around Tanzania, trying to find out what the situation might be in Tanzania, and trying to get any intelligence on anything that might have gone wrong. Fortunately, she was a pretty good friend of mine, so we did help her out with to a certain extent with some of the Vismo side of things. But it just surprised me how little there was in place by her very sizable university to support her, certainly a lone female traveller, when she was travelling out to a pretty remote area.
Zoe, if we have time, I could jump in.
Yeah, please do. Thank you for that,
Yeah, I
Colin. Yes,
mean,
please do,
for me,
Jessie.
I think this question fits in a broader question of just like when to use tech and like what is the purpose of technology. And I think ultimately what that boils down to, and as an AI company, it feels particularly relevant to data miner, is technology as an assistant, right? As a way of doing things faster, more efficiently. It becomes particularly relevant and useful for teams that are small, nimble, short on resources, right? Because it allows you to do more work with a smaller and scrappier team. I'll also say, through the lens of what we do at Dataminer, real-time alerting, we are living in a world of a polycrisis, right? So we are seeing more and more crises emerge, be they conflicts or natural disasters, and how they interact with each other. So crises are becoming more frequent and more intense because they are essentially piling off on each other and interacting with each other. And it is really kind of humanly impossible to stay up to date on everything that is happening around the world at any given point in time. And so when you look across all of the technologies represented on the call today, a big part of what we do is make it so a human doesn't have to track that, doesn't have to try to track that, but in fact provide the information that allows an individual or a small risk or security team to be able to report on, provide important context to their travelers, and keep them safe. Yeah.
I think that's a really good point you raised there about natural disasters and crises. They are going to continue to happen. We can't predict when they're going to happen. But when they do happen, it's having the technology to be able to say, this is happening in your area. And also in our case, how do I find those people? If I don't know their location, I can't send any assistance to them if it's required. So using technology that is available on the mobile phone to send location back to a central portal, to a central communication center where somebody can see exactly where people are in relation to a particular incident, is how technology can be used really, really effectively.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much to both of you there for your comments as well. And I think, you know, often in security and travel risk management, we think about this sort of this cycle, this process that we go through, right? Where at the beginning we're sort of assessing these risks, which is of course where organizations and programs, you know, such as RiskPal come into place, making sure that in advance people are aware of what these risks are and how to mitigate them. Doing our best to make sure that those mitigation measures are in place and those good practices and best practices. But then, of course, you know, moving on to sort of what the two, both you, Jessie, and Colin mentioned, is once these things happen, we then need to be very reactive. Right, so it's about, I guess, having that balance of both being proactive in advance to travel, but then also being reactive and using data, tech, and tools to really support us with that. So yeah, thank you very much for those comments. I'd like to move on now to quite a hot topic in this space, which is really about privacy and data security and safety. So I'd really like to ask, how do you balance collecting data for safety with concerns around privacy and data protection?
So having been, as I think we all have been through the procurement mill, if we like, of working with universities, is the benefit of this is often institutions will have dedicated privacy infosec teams that will be looking at onboarding any kind of new software, which is great because it means for the audience here and from universities, you don't need to worry so much about that. Obviously, you want the assurances of it, and that I just guess would be my key point is expect minimum standards from any vendors. which will be part of a procurement check, and get the reassurance that whatever technology you're using does have, whether it's ISO 27001, GDPR privacy components, set those expectations which will be present to have the reassurance that data is being managed carefully. And I think that's really just a key point for any sort of tech that's being utilized. And the benefit is, as mentioned, you've got teams that will help you within the institutions to kind of oversee that part. There's a lot of options as well you can present to the students and academics or whoever's traveling around, options to opt in, opt out. There's all sorts of user interface components that can explain things to the user, and I think that's another fundamental part, so that if there are concerns around data management and what it's being utilized for, that you're able to explain that very clearly to anyone that's traveling and has any concerns.
Thank you for that, Tom. Colin, I think you were speaking as well a little bit earlier. Did you want to jump in there?
No, it's just yeah, thanks for those comments, Tom. I've seen more InfoSec questionnaires than I care to mention over the years. And they're never exactly the same. You can't just copy and paste. So I do feel your pains there. I think from the Vismo point of view, data privacy is very high on the agenda. We are taking people's locations and assigning a name to that person, and email addresses, etc. So people can see exactly where an individual is. And yeah, students they're using location services all the time. They're posting meals that they're having on and the location on Instagram, and Vismo uses exactly that technology. But we also recognize that some of their time is private. They might not necessarily want to have their location displayed to whoever the person is who can view their location. So within any of our services, there is always the option to go into what we call privacy mode. So within the Vismo app, you would press a privacy button, and that would stop all tracking. So you could get on a flight, travel to another part of the world, and your location would not be updated because you've gone into privacy mode. So we've respected that side of things from the sharing of data, location data. The one caveat we put on that is that if somebody found themselves in a situation of duress, however that happened, and they were in privacy mode and they pressed the panic button, we made the decision as an organization to say, look, this is potentially a real threat, a real risk. Let's come out of privacy mode. Let's raise any alert and start tracking again. We'll also let the user know, the traveler know, that they're no longer in privacy mode. They might have been an accidental activation. So trying to respect location privacy, real privacy, is something that is certainly brought up on pretty much every conversation we have with any university or corporation.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of the challenge there is about balancing the risk and benefit that people might be perceiving, right? At the end of the day, university students or researchers or academics can often find themselves in quite precarious situations. And so it's about having that reassurance there, that, you know, instead of having an old school map on the wall with dots and pins of where everyone is located, we can see things such as history if we want to, right? And we know perhaps, okay, this person might have had an incident in this location, now we see them in this location, so what does that mean? But again, you know, like you're saying, Colin, it's about ensuring that there is that informed risk and people, or that informed consent, sorry, to ensure that people are aware of, you know, this is what you're signing up for. So, you know, and that you have a choice there. Jessie, did you have anything you wanted to add to this particular section?
It is less of a concern for the nature of what Data Miner does. So we are not collecting data from our users other than an email address in order to set up accounts and their sort of subjects or geographies of interest. So what kinds of events and where are those events taking place? What are they most interested in? So there's less risk, but that said, there's always risk when you're interacting with folks. So I think to Tom's point, you always want to make sure that the tech companies you're interacting with have the appropriate certifications, are GDPR compliant, right? Some of the things that GDPR gets at are, how long are you storing the information? What information are you taking in? How long are you storing it for? Who has access to it? Is it only the sort of the necessary parties and the necessary periods of time? And those are the kinds of protections you want to put in place independent of the technology. So data miner does take it seriously, but because we collect so little personal information from our users, it's sort of less of a big thing. I think the next question you're going to ask is about AI, and that becomes a bigger concern for what we do.
Okay, fantastic. There we go. Oh, sorry, Tom, did you want to say something as well?
I was just going to say, and I think this was touched on and looked at in detail in the last webinar, is actually evidently one of the challenges that university travel risk managers have is wanting to personalize and customize the risk assessment prior to travel around a person's profile, and whether that's about if they've got a disability, for example, or something about their mental well-being, and actually documenting that is an extremely big leap for some people to put into a, whether it's a platform, a piece of paper, a risk assessment, and questions around that is a real balance that I think a lot of travel risk managers are juggling with, because, and in terms of legislation, that is often falls under the special category data field as well. So that is something that I think even today is still a constant sort of question mark around how that's managed, how that's stored safely, and you can give the reassurance to the users that that's being only done or shared for the purposes of actually doing a risk assessment, and that's again, it's for them to willingly provide. So I think that's just something in this travel remit that we see a lot with regards to increasing personalization of traveler profiles versus that data privacy kind of balance.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to add to that, a lot of this information or a lot of these concerns can also be addressed as part of this risk assessment process, right? So depending on where someone's traveling to, it's really important to understand the context of that location, perhaps what protective laws they have in place, perhaps whether it's they're traveling somewhere where the state has more surveillance capabilities than others. So, it's doing part of that risk assessment process as well. We can enlighten ourselves so we're aware of what some of these risks might be and the fact they may be heightened in certain locations. So thank you very much to all three of you for that. I'd like to move on now to Jessie's favorite topic, as we can see, artificial intelligence. So the question I really have for you all now is, how do you see AI and machine learning being integrated into risk forecasting and traveller safety? Now, obviously, this is quite a dangerous one, because the last thing I want to do is make myself redundant in a job role here. So please don't give us the answer to everything, but what do you see that looking like, and how do you see that being integrated into travel risk management for higher education and universities?
I'm going to assume I should jump in first.
Yes, go for it.
I think there's AI as a component of everything we do, like everyone is doing on this call, but we are an AI platform first and foremost. And I think there's a couple of questions wrapped into what you've asked, Zoe. And the first I'd just say is, when I speak about AI in any context, I always talk about both responsible and appropriate AI, right? So responsible AI is thinking about what are the potential harms that could be done through using AI, and making sure that you've effectively assessed that and are building in protections to avoid that. So for example, when data miner is providing our services to governments, we remove all of the social media handles from our reporting. You can't search for social media handles in our alerts because we want to avoid any improper use or like around surveillance, essentially, right? So when we're pulling from these data sources, that's really important to us. And then appropriate AI is really thinking about how can it be helpful versus like replacing human human work. And I think that's not just an ethical question, right? That's also recognizing there are things humans can do that technology will never be able to do. There are things that people are trying to get technology to mimic, but that's all it will ever be, is sort of a simulation. So if you think about like empathy, if someone has experienced a security incident while traveling abroad, that is not something you want AI to handle. You want a human on the other end of that phone call or whatever emergency phone call helping advise that person, because they're likely frightened or traumatized or something like that, right? So those are two things I always think about when it comes to like AI writ large. In terms of the other part of your question, so I always want to talk about like the risks first, because I have to acknowledge, working for an AI company, that looms large. But you also asked about sort of the benefits and where I see this going. And really for data miner, where AI comes in is really about speed and sense making. So we ingest data from over 1 million different publicly available data sources. That includes social media, government websites, sensor data, so like traffic cam data, air sensor data, as well as for our cyber alerting from the deep and dark web. It's a lot of different data in a lot of different formats. We have text, video, images, audio. That is not something a human would be capable of doing. You would inherently miss important signals about risk, or security risk or threats. And so I think that's what AI is really good at, is taking really large and really complex data sets and making sense of them so that humans can use them in appropriate and responsible ways to deliver the services that they have to deliver. I'll say, in terms of where I see it going, I think you're going to see a lot more of sort of obviously people are reading about generative AI, so you're going to see a lot more AI in helping to create summaries and reports, not necessarily large contextual ones like what RiskPal does, but short summaries of an event that's happened or something like that. You will start seeing predictive AI, but I think Colin sort of hinted at this. There's some risk to predictions, and so you always need a human in the loop to sort of verify. And then I also think like context. So we're working on something called context agents. So when an event happens, what's the context around the event, that can help humans make sense of what's happening and understand the nuances to be able to provide the right advice to the travelers that they're assisting. So that's kind of where I see the benefits of AI, but also the things we have to keep in mind about where it's appropriate to use.
Yeah, thank you very much for Jesse for that. And I think you've raised a couple of really interesting points. And I think what you're mentioning about response and appropriate and sort of empathy, I think those 3 points that you made are really valid, especially to people who are working with students and people of potential, quite diverse and varied profiles. So yeah, I think some really good points there. Thank you. Tom, I think I saw you eager to say something as well.
No, I just think it's a fascinating space that we're continuing to try and keep up with in some regards. I think the areas I think it's going to come in and be really useful on the forecasting and traveler safety component might also be how it can be used for behavioral learning. So there's evidently the mass data collation, which Jesse alluded to, but also being able to look back, for example, in our context at previous risk assessments, gather and sort of interrogate that, and then provide recommendations for what others were doing. So you'll almost take on this sort of the generative component, but longer term, even with the use of some agentic AI, is actually the potential to make recommendations for suggestions if you are traveling to location X, or if you are taking a boat, or you are working at height, whatever it can be, even activity or destination related content. I see that AI is going to increasingly inform part of that risk assessment process as well. And I think the one where it could be valuable as well for especially small stretch teams like we see in academia. And going back to our first point about tech being an enabler, but not the be all and end all, is actually it could facilitate some decision-making support as well. So out of hours, and that's where we might start to see more autonomous processes, not overtaking or overriding decisions, but actually helping facilitate that, which I think is going to be really important. A couple of risks. Well, one I see is maybe around for us to understand if, and again, this is speaking to RiskPal, and the risk assessment part is how making sure that they haven't just been created by an AI tool and that the human has actually been involved in that, both in terms of writing their own risk assessments, but also the sign-off process. So ensuring that there's adequate checks around that are going to be really important, and something for us all to think about as capabilities develop.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think that there is always that concern around complacency and over reliance on this tech or these AI programs. Obviously, at the end of the day, it would be ideal for the traveler to be doing this research and to get this insight so that they can properly have a clear understanding of what some of these risks are. But I think also this kind of brings me to a question, which actually we hadn't sort of discussed, but one that is around how would you see these tools being used in the higher education space? I mean, is it something that we would anticipate the travelers, the researchers, the academics, the students themselves having access and utilizing these tools? Would we see it as being used mainly by the travel risk management team or the safety and security team, and then ones that hold sort of the logins and the memberships for these tools? Yeah, I'd be interested to hear from, perhaps, I mean, Colin, with your platform, it's typically the travel management team that would have access to the dashboard. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we've been fortunate enough to be integrated or have Data Miner integrated into Vismo for 5 or 6 years now. So a travel risk manager can see an incident that's brought through very quickly by Data Miner on the Vismo portal, and they can see exactly where their travelers are in relation to that incident. We do have the technology to be able to pass an incident directly down to the traveler, but pretty much without exception, every client we ever speak to says, no, we want to have the travel risk manager to have that interface with the traveler, to reach out to them directly rather than to pass down information automatically to the end user. And I think the reason for that is they don't want to cause panic. They don't want to have people ringing up lots of people, telling, spreading misinformation. It's much more controlled if certainly the feedback we've had from travel risk managers is they prefer it if they control the dissemination of that information to those users who might be impacted.
Yeah, I would just jump onto what Colin has shared as well. We find the same thing. Security professionals, safeguarding professionals prefer to be sort of the focal point for all of that information so that they can decide how to distribute it. And I don't think it's just about wanting to avoid causing panic, although that's part of it. There's also, I think, concern that people will take action based on data, right? Like they may do something that they think will keep them safe, but in fact is against like advice, right? So, stay in place versus trying to get to the airport, right? You need security professionals who understand how to make informed decisions about what to do in the face of a major incident. And so I think that's part of it too, is they're also worried that the individual students that are traveling, or in our case, humanitarian aid workers, who, by the way, tend to have a really low sense of risk because they work in really dangerous places in the world. And I imagine that's probably true for certain university researchers too, right? You're passionate about your research and you believe that comes first and foremost. And so they may not actually understand the gravity of an incident. And so I think that's the other reason why having humans in the loop and specifically, trained security professionals who understand how to make sense of these risks and provide informed advice is always going to be important, no matter how good the technology gets. Yeah.
And I'd just add to your question about how universities can use AI and who should be controlling the sort of tools. I think we need to recognize that everyone is going to be using it to some degree in their work on a day-to-day or however frequent basis. So it's not worth in some respects trying to control or expect that certain travel risk management tools will be the only interface with AI, because it's going to be whether it's, Copilot in someone's email or something relating to whatever their specialist subject is that they're working on or studying. So that crossover between just general workflow and then into the travel risk management world will inevitably blur with utilization of
If I can also just say that, like Tom, I think, and this is not what data miner does, but I do believe this is what ILS does. That's why things like heat training and things like that become really important for individuals who are not security professionals. So making sure that they are somewhat informed, so that if they're going off and using all these tools, they at least have some knowledge of the processes about how to keep themselves safe while traveling. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that comes back actually to what Tom was saying as well, in terms of, we can't stop people from using these tools, and we don't necessarily want to stop them from using these tools, but it's about making sure that they are aware of how they work, they're aware of any potential limitations, and also that they receive the necessary training, and that they're informed on what is the role of this and what still needs to be done by themselves as a human, and what decisions need to be made. And of course, supplementing that with in-person training or other forms of training as well are really important, because at the end of the day, if someone's stuck in X location, they don't have access to AI, or they don't have access to things such as data miner, then they need to be able to know how to react to certain situations, and that's going to come down to them making those decisions, and having those reactions themselves. I'm just going to move on now to the next one, just for the sake of time, really. I'd like to speak about some real life applications here. So do you have any examples or any lessons that you've learned from recent global disruptions, in terms of risk preparedness, and really just how have these digital tools and tech evolved to support travelers that are affected by some of these global disruptions or some of these incidents, or those who are operating in higher risk environments? The go-to one is always COVID-19 pandemic, but feel free to speak about another if you prefer.
We get them all the time. Whether it's the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, whether it's the explosion in Beirut, whether it was Ukraine, whether it's fires in California. It's always the case of, when there is a crisis, trying to locate those people. Are those people actually in the area? So, and being able to provide appropriate advice to get them out of there. But in cases like Turkey and Syria, when the earthquake hit, the infrastructure failed, so the networks went down because mass cell towers fell down. But at least having an application on your phone that gave a last known location when the network went down and you couldn't make a phone call and you couldn't get the internet and you couldn't get through to anybody at all, at least somebody in a travel risk position had the last known location of that person. So were they in the vicinity, or were they somewhere completely different? So that is one vital thing about, certainly from our point of view, that we see a lot of people say network's gone down, but I've at least got a last known location, the last 5 minutes of where that individual is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Colin. And again, that really would make such a difference when it comes to emergency support. right? So again, like you said, you might not know exactly where they are right now, but just knowing where their last known location was, especially if you have multiple travelers, knowing whether perhaps they were in a similar area, or perhaps whether they were dispersed across a certain location. I can see that as being really, really useful. Sort of sticking to the same sort of theme of some of these more severe disruptions or some of these high risk locations, what are the challenges or limitations of using digital tech and tools in difficult or restrictive contexts? So I'm thinking about contexts where perhaps there may be sanctions against a location, perhaps there are restrictions on what type of tech you can use, perhaps certain sites are controlled by states, access is limited to certain programs or softwares. How do we still utilize some of these tools when there are these restrictions in place in certain locations?
Do you want me to have a go at that one, anybody?
Go for it. Yeah, you go for it.
Yeah, there's other technologies out there. I mean, Vismo is a predominantly app-based solution on a mobile phone, but there are going to be areas of the world where there is no mobile coverage. So how do I accurately locate somebody in an area where there is no mobile coverage? And the only solution really is a satellite-based solution, so an Iridium type solution. However, there are restrictions in place in certain countries where Iridium is not allowed to be used, and certainly in India and Pakistan, if you get caught with an Iridium device, you're going to be in serious trouble. There are travelers who have been traveling across large tracts of the world where they've had an Iridium device just to talk to family, etc., and they've ended up in prison for quite some substantial periods. So our advice is you need to check. You need to check with the local embassies that certain devices can be used in certain countries. Embargoes is another issue. Many countries have embargoes not allowing certain mobile operators, because they're a UK-based operator, to work in that particular country. So if you're traveling there and expecting service to always be in place, you always need to check with your mobile operator, am I going to a country where I'm not allowed to roam? And if that is the case, then I need to make sure I've got a local SIM or a SIM from an operator that is allowed to roam in that particular country. So it's something we face on a regular basis, and certainly from a satellite point of view, it's always check with the local embassies in the country that a device can be used in those particular countries, and also check with your home operator that roaming is available in the country that you're visiting.
I can also jump in here. We don't encounter this a lot, but I have occasionally spoken with partners who are operating in restrictive or authoritarian government, in countries with authoritarian governments. I was a US Peace Corps volunteer in Nicaragua, so that might be why this particular example comes to mind. But we were chatting with an organization that does work on freedom, societal freedoms and open governments and things like that. And they wanted to use our product to understand restrictions that might be put into place in certain governments. Specifically in Nicaragua, they were concerned about having our app on their phone, not because there's any personal information or anything really risky in the app, but if a Nicaraguan government official or the army or the police were to pull them over and look at the apps on their phone and then Google data miner, one of the things that will come up is not our primary, but one of our large customer groups is news teams, because they obviously, if you think about real-time alerting, it helps journalists report more quickly on incidents and to have access to places where they might not otherwise have physical access to do reporting. And so that comes up, and this organization was concerned about like, oh, okay, well then they'll sort of see us as a journalistic organization. There's massive restriction of press in Nicaragua. So how will that reflect on us? And one of the things that we put into place because of some of these concerns arising is like an automatic timeout on the mobile app. And so that's one thing that can help is to like make sure that people can't sort of get into it. It obviously, if you just see the app and you Google it, doesn't help with that. But some of the things where it's like, okay, well, like what if they tap on the app and see what that person is looking at, what the sort of watch lists are, if you will, what would that say about them, and would it put that person at risk? So the automatic timeout on the mobile app is one security measure we put in place to help with those kinds of situations.
And just two very quick points to add to that, I think is and they're somewhat related. So one is just a lot of these things you should be, that's the purpose of the risk assessment in some ways, is actually identifying pre-travel. Are you going to face issues with your, whether it's your DigiSec profile or what you're doing, and actually thinking about them and having them preparations in place in the event of an incident, or because you need to travel with a different device, etc. And then just link to that more broadly, and I think it's irrespective of whatever your technological solutions are in place, is actually coming back to the human, is it's about preparedness, right? So preparedness in the event of an incident, because if you haven't tested your protocols, or you've never logged into your incident platform or tested your Vismo devices, don't let the first time be when there's a crisis, right? So because you will not remember, it might be something like you don't remember your password, and then all these things mean that in the event of a crisis, your response will fail if it is not practiced, whatever technology you're using. So I think that would be the key drawback of any technology, if you like, is, or any general travel risk management program, is if it's not tested and not communicated, then actually, yeah, it's very redundant very quickly.
I could see Colin nodding along there, probably speaking from experience, not yourself, but receiving emergency emails saying, I can't remember my password.
Yeah, that's a very common one, Tom. You're absolutely spot on. The number of times we get a phone call, we'll look at something, we'll see data miner come up with an incident, and sure enough, the phone will ring off the wall with people saying, I forgot my password, or I haven't got any data roaming. So yeah, good point.
Oh gosh, yeah, I can imagine the stress, the stress there. Fantastic, thank you so much. We've just got a little bit of time left, so I'd like to quickly just focus on quite another popular topic, I suppose, amongst probably some listeners here today. Looking ahead into the future. What safety and security tech trends should we and those in this higher education research space be watching for in travel risk management over the next 3 to 5 years? What do you think that looks like?
So two things I'd notice is there's going to be an expectation on the traveler and the end user for better and better user experience. And with that is going to be, there's a bit of a buzz coming out about increased personalization of a travel risk experience at the moment. So I think that's trying to marry the two. So I think that's, yeah, the expectation will continually rise around the better travel risk management experience, if you like, or tools that they're using. I think we're going to look to more systems to be integrated, whether that's through APIs and more seamless journeys from your booking to your end-to-end type services, but that's quite a challenge as well. For the academic institutions, I think we've got to have a short recognition that there is a lot of budgetary pressure on them at the moment. So there is going to be that expectation of doing more with less. And what I think the travel managers here will face is actually framing the discussion for costs around tech actually being an enabler and helping save costs longer term. It's going to be a really, really key area. And one I haven't seen yet, but I think years in the future we'll start to see more of with utilization of AI is going to be more perhaps real-time based insurance quotes for certain travel policies based on, yeah, arguably more environmental and contextual variables, which I think will be interesting as that develops. There's a few bits there.
That's really interesting points there, Tom, and I think all of us will know, or may have been that person who travels, and it's only once you've started traveling where you realize, okay, I don't actually have the correct insurance, or perhaps I didn't get my insurance, or something is about to happen and I need to be able to on the go pick up on these resources and get access to these resources, which of course is where things such as digital tech and tools really are so important, right, to fill that gap. Colin, I think you were about to say something as well there.
I was going to agree with one of the points that Tom made. Integration of different systems. It's a cliche I'm hearing with increasing regularity is we, as a travel risk manager, we want the one pane of glass. So to have everything displayed on one portal, and hence the reason we've worked with people like Data Miner to pull in their feeds into Vismo to see where locations are. It's pulling all that information into one portal, so you've got one source of truth. And yes, definitely go to Data Miner's portal when you need to dive deeper, and that's what most people do. But having one screen up, one user interface, APIs feeding into that is something that we're seeing with increasing regularity.
Yeah, I think we'll all, I think in our prep call, we spoke a lot about integration. I think Colin's exactly right in terms of the single pane of glass, just having one view. We talk to watch centers a lot, and to have to manage 3 or 4 different technologies, 3 or 4 different screens, it complicates the matter, it creates space for things to fall through the cracks. And so I do think integrations are key. I think the challenge is that some of these teams, the scrappier the team, the less likely they are to be like technologically savvy. They might be security savvy, but not technologically savvy. And so it is upon us, the tech companies, to make it really easy to plug and play to create that single pane of glass. So it's great. You know, we have partnerships with Vismo, we have partnerships with Esri, we have partnerships with a lot of different tech companies with varying degrees of success depending on how savvy the partner is to be able to integrate those when it comes to a direct API. And so therefore, like having the connectors, the direct connectors where we can just turn it on for the client, adjust the settings, twist the knobs, and then it just feeds through seamlessly. I think that's really important. I'll also just say, I think we're going to see more and more automation of these things, but to our earlier discussion, it's critical that humans remain in the loop. I fear the risks that happen if we aren't checking the technology. And there are certain places where it's already good enough to beat a human at doing things, but there are still areas like the empathy bit. And even just sort of verification of events, right? Like we don't do verification at Data Miner. We pick up signals, but we trust the folks that use our platform. We give them the tools to do so, to look at the original content, to be able to verify that incident is happening. And I think it's like we cannot emphasize it enough. And I think it's important to empower the folks, to Tom's point, who are facing sort of like, oh, you know, resource constraints, got to do more with less, that technology can be part of that. It can certainly make you more efficient, but humans have to be part of that, or you're going to end up actually having really bad things happen because you're over-reliant on technology. And that costs way more than the salaries of a few humans to be able to interact with that technology, verify, and provide empathy and advice. So that would be my other thing. It's a trend where I can see us going more and more to automation, but I think there's a warning in there to be cautious about how much we default to tech.
Well, Jessie, I think on behalf of myself and any other risk management professionals on this call, thank you very much for making it clear that we are not redundant and we are needed. I appreciate that. Fantastic. So we've actually come to the end of the main part of our discussion today. So thank you very much to each of you for your contributions and your insights. We do have a few minutes now where I'd like to just address a couple of questions that we have received. The first one, I believe, is actually targeted more towards the Vismo side, although it could actually be for the Data Miner side as well. And that is, what would be the solution to someone who did not want such an app on a personal device? Now, I know we spoke to this a little bit, of course, where we discussed, for example, Colin with the satellite phones. Are there any other solutions to this? And also, Jesse, I'm not sure if you have anything to add afterwards as well.
I think we come across this a lot. The things with other devices are they you need to keep them charged up. They're a separate device. You need to keep an eye on them. They'll get lost. They'll fall down the toilet. The dog will eat them. And if you leave them in the hotel bedroom on the side of the on the bedside cabinet, and you set off in the Uber to go to a particular location, you won't turn the Uber around to go and pick them up. An app on somebody's mobile phone, it's keys, passport, mobile phone. You've always got them with you. I think it's how it's sold to the individual that's important. I know we're taking tracking information, location information. It is how it's sold. It is, if something goes wrong, I'm sure you'd like your family, friends, your organization to be able to find you and provide assistance. And it really does boil down to that. If they ultimately say, I don't want it, then there's not a lot an organization can do apart from to say, well, we don't want to send you there because from a duty of care point of view, we feel this is a high risk destination and we're not going to send you.
Yeah, I will just add again, because of the nature of our product, it doesn't tend to be a massive concern, but we do have an app that people can use not just to have alerts, but you can turn on something called near me alerting. So essentially you can set a radius for where you are, and we will send you any alerts that are within that radius. And so I guess that could be the one concern, but honestly, most folks really appreciate that, because if you're ingesting a million different publicly available data sources, billions of data points a day that turn into hundreds of thousands of alerts, a user can be overwhelmed by the quantity of that. And so being able to turn on something where it's like, it's just the stuff that's in my vicinity and I'm not feeling overwhelmed. Generally, that's something that people appreciate. And it's not the location data that's being stored. It's just a way it's happening right on the mobile app just to send the alerts based on your location. And so that would be one thing that I guess I would say if people are concerned about having our app on their phone.
Perfect. Thank you both very much for that. And onto our last question as well here, which is how does student travel differ from corporate travel? Is there anything in the tech that would be different other than age-related aspects, which I think, again, is quite an interesting point to be making here. And they also had a third question linked into that as well, which is, does study abroad programs and youth travel covered by ISO 31030 have a similar mindset regarding assessments, location, and response? So there's three big questions there. If we want to break it down, anyone like to start on that one?
So I guess one initial point I'd say is, and then I think it's also referring to the 3130, which is 31, which I think is then the youth travel specific component is, yeah, the age-related component is really important, but because it also then does bring in data potentially of parents, guardians as well. So it's not just around minors, but of those that would be their response or their emergency contacts. Which also needs consideration. With regards to the assessment and response side, there are things that evidently, like youth study programs, can be up to 12 months. So you're looking at it typically, even though it's technically travel, the duration of these really has a big impact for considerations around insurance, and then also just that response capability. So if you're and communication, so do you still require check-ins, for example, that you might be doing on a one week program? So there is definitely unique components of longer terms which you wouldn't typically see in a corporate travel environment. I think also the obvious thing is budgets, which is really important, is budgets are not as extensive as what we will see for some of the larger corporates. So that will feed into then things like accommodation, transportation. There's obviously volume of people. We often tend to focus on the traveler as an individual. This is talking about group travel, which involves maybe up to sort of 50 or whatever the number of individuals. So I think there are a lot of unique components there. But I'll let the others comment on that as well.
Nothing from my side. I think you've covered it off perfectly there, Tom. The only thing I would add is that students are far more capable of downloading and signing into apps.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. The only thing I'd add, and it's not really related to the tech, is the training required. So if you're going to have apps on your phone, yes, younger people are more technologically savvy, but they are also, our brains are not fully formed until we're 25 years old. The sense of risk you experience as a young person is very different than the sense of risk you experience if you're a corporate employee with a family that you want to get back to. And so I think that for me is the biggest thing that comes up, is like the requirement to make sure that these younger travelers are in fact understanding the risks of where they're going to, not just by saying these are the risks, but really helping to contextualize it and give them a sense of what's at stake and what their behaviors need to be to keep them safe.
Yeah, perfect. I think that actually ended it off in a really fantastic place. So thank you so very much to Colin, Tom and Jessie for your time today. We really appreciate your insights from your expertise and your backgrounds. Thank you very much to our participants for joining us today. It's been great to have you, and for those questions as well, really interesting and always great to hear what some of your concerns are and what topics and nuances perhaps that you want to contribute to the conversation. So thank you for that. If you do have any further questions, please do feel free to reach out either to ILS or to RiskPal or DataMiner or Vismo. You will be able to find our details on LinkedIn on the promotional material that we've been developing for today's webinar as well. But thank you very much. Wishing you all a great rest of your week. And yeah, we'll see you in the future for hopefully another webinar series that we develop.